Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
In this episode, my guest is Ryan Lemmon, otherwise known as Sideshow, a local radio broadcaster who hosts the morning show on CFMK-FM in Kingston, Ontario. With over 15 years of experience in the industry and a passion for connecting with his listeners, Sideshow has made a name for himself in local radio circles. In addition to his work on the airwaves, he also hosts a podcast dedicated to reviewing old WWE wrestling matches. The two of us do a little reminiscing about the past. Sideshow works at the same station I did 45 years ago, and we spend some time discussing the future of radio in this ever-changing media landscape. Here is my conversation with Ryan Lemmon. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Most people would know you as Sideshow because that's the name that you use on the air.
Yeah, even my kids call me Sideshow.
Even your kids.
Yep. Usually when they're mad. It's like when my mom would throw out my middle name, I knew I was in trouble. When my kids call me Sideshow, right. I am in for it.
You're in deep trouble. We want to remind folks who are listening today that this show is being recorded at the beginning of March 2023. So let's start off with this. Why radio in the first place?
You know, that's a really good question. I think it was kind of by accident, if I'm being completely honest. I went to Ernestown Secondary School in Odessa. And I was always the drama kid. I was the theater kid. I was the music kid, and I really wanted to do this thing called a focus program that they had in one of the schools. It was a theater program that I really wanted to do, and I remember I had bugged my drama teacher to give me a reference to do it, because you needed a reference, you needed an audition, and all this stuff to take part in it. And some wires got crossed and it didn't get sent in on time. And I think it was a guidance counselor, one of them, said something about, well, there's a radio program. Why don't you try that? So I went to KCVI and I did the radio program there, the 91.9 FM, The Cave. And I got my feet wet there, and I realized, hey, this is actually something I might enjoy. And they didn't scare me away from it in college. So as hard as they tried, they didn't scare me away from it at Loyalist College. So I stuck with it. I think, like anybody who gets into radio, they get into it for all the wrong reasons. They get into it because they love music and they want to play their favorite music, or they get into it because they want to inform and everything. And then you quickly realize that radio is a business. And there was part of that business that I still actually really liked. I think that scared a lot of people away, and I stuck with it.
And there were a lot of people who get into radio at this level, meaning the Kingston market, which for those folks who are listening who are not from Kingston, would be considered a medium-sized market. I would think it's still considered that.
Size-wise, you could consider it a small market.
Okay.
Like just population-wise. It definitely competes at a medium market, a large medium market level. But it was at Canadian Music Week, you can enter your station in Kingston as either a medium market or a small market station, however you want to do that, because it's kind of right on the border there.
Getting back to what I was saying is that there are people who get into radio in this market hoping to move to a bigger market. So this is a way station.
A lot of times,
to success. Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. First job that you got in radio that was a paying job. Now, I have a little story to tell you. I talked to a friend of mine who has been in radio for a long, long time. So we went back to the mid-'60s when he got his first job out of high school.
Yeah.
He was sending out applications while he was in high school. And one day a program director called his house. His dad picked up the phone. And I thought maybe his dad didn't even know his son had applied for a job. But program director says, your son applied for a job. We have one. And the dad said, I'll have his suitcase packed and ready to go when he gets home from school, and I'll put him on the bus.
Yeah,
So
that sounds right.
What's your first story?
Well, my first story is almost didn't happen. I was finishing college. I had done a few overnight shifts at a station in Belleville. At the time, it was called Light 107. And I remember the program director saying to me, geez, Ryan, you're good. You're good. You sound like you belong on a rock station. And I left, and then they flipped to Rock 107 shortly after. Go figure. But I was in college, and at the end of college, you have to have a placement in order to graduate, and that almost didn't happen. I was sending out resumes and demos and applications like crazy, and I wasn't hearing back from people, just not hearing back from programmers, and I just kind of got to the point where I was like, maybe it's not for me. That's okay. And I had a professor at Loyalist, who's retired now, John Henderson, who said to me, damn it, Ryan, you should be doing this. This is for you. And he said, I know you have your heart set on Kingston. He said, well, that's my home. I don't want to leave. And so we picked up the phone, and he called K-Rock 105.7 in Kingston. And he asked for Glenn Williams, who was the program director at the time. Glenn wasn't there, so we got the promotions director. And the promotions director said, well, okay, get him to send me some stuff, and maybe we'll bring him on as an intern. And that's the only reason I even ended up in this crazy business, is because one guy at Loyalist College thought I should not give up on it. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, I took the internship, folded T-shirts and got people coffee for a month or so. And before the internship was over, I turned to Glenn G, who was the program director, and I said, listen, my internship's over tomorrow. Can I still come in? And he said, well, yeah, we're not going to pass up the free labor. Sure, why not? So that's what I did. And it was a matter of every time someone was needed, there was the kid who wasn't getting paid sitting in the corner filing stuff or folding T-shirts. And that was how I ended up on the air. That was how I ended up turning a hobby into a job, into a career.
And this is also testament to the influence of teachers who look at a student and say, this is where you belong, so let me help you get there.
I absolutely believe that. I don't, honestly, I don't know how a guy like John Henderson did it, because I could go back and listen to my early tapes from college and say, well, this kid's never getting a job. Or, wow, that's terrible. I don't know how to make that better. But he, as someone who had been in the industry for a long time, could hear something in those early tapes that made him go, yep, this is what someone at this level in college should sound like and can get better. And I never, if I were to listen to those tapes today, would never think, yep, that kid will still be working in that career 20 years later.
One of the things we should probably tell our audience, those of you who are listening who don't know too much about radio, is that over the years, radio stations have changed their call letter identifications.
Yep.
And they've changed the name by which they go because they change the kind of music that they're playing on the station. And in the business, it's called changing the format of the station. So just that little proviso for people who are listening who are not quite sure what the heck we're talking about here. What did you like about radio once you got hired?
Oh, well, when I first started, everything was exciting, right? There was the excitement of just turning on a microphone and knowing that people were going to hear it. I was scared to death, don't get me wrong, but I was excited by it and I was interested in it. And when the phones would light up, which was pretty well constant. I mean, one of my first on-air jobs, again, sitting there filing stuff, and they said, hey, kid, the Saturday night all request guy is leaving. Do you want to do a Saturday night all request show? And every Saturday night from 6 till midnight, I sat in that studio and took requests and played music I probably shouldn't have played, but it was their fault for having it in the library.
Yeah.
I took calls all night, and that was on a Saturday night in the middle of summer. People were calling the radio station nonstop from 6 till midnight to get those requests in, and that was exciting. So there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of hey, I get to go to these concerts and actually kind of go up on stage and introduce bands. I get to, all these things were very exciting, and just the idea.
Get in free.
And it was free, yeah. Oh God, it was free. Was awesome. I think the biggest, honestly, the most exciting part of it for me was the first time someone came up to me and said, "Hey, a month ago you said this," and then they wanted to comment on something I said on the air, and it's just it immediately made you feel like, wow, there's this feeling of connection with someone you're meeting for the very first time, but they've known you for months or years. Mm-hmm. And I love that part of it.
When I worked in radio a long time ago, one of the kicks I got was going up on stage at the Memorial Center, the old arena, and introducing Johnny Cash, who came to Kingston.
Wow.
And when I met him backstage, he walked up to me and said, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash."
Like it's a
Where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
But it was amazing. Yeah, it was that kick of getting up on stage and letting people see who the individual is who's behind the microphone. A lot of people never meet the announcer.
Yeah, it's very true. I think nowadays the industry's changed so much in that it's part of our jobs to be on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. And that was something that, when I started I remember when I said to my boss, we should get a MySpace page for the station. He scoffed at me. What is this? I mean, don't get me wrong. MySpace doesn't exist anymore, but that was the beginning of a lot of these things. And I remember them sort of scoffing at me like, we're a radio station. What do we need this for? Now I get pulled into meetings once every couple of weeks going, could you post on Instagram a little more? It's part of the job now. So I think we are a lot more accessible now. We are a lot more visible than we used to be. And I think at the beginning, I used to get that's not what I thought you looked like. But I know, taller, handsomer, I get it. Yeah. But at the same time, now I think people just see our faces so much from the stuff we always used to do, the events, the concerts, things like that. But now with social media, I mean, we're connecting more that way than any other way, I think, than ever before.
Back in my day, we played records that you would have to clean and put on the turntable.
Those are those round things, right?
Yes, the big round things, the little round things. Let's talk about the music you played. When you were in college, your voice was attributed to a rock format, according to some of your teachers and peers. Your favorite kind of music these days, regardless of what you have to play on the show? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think, since high school, something went wrong, and I started listening to Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all these grunge bands, and I got real angsty for a while there, and I still love that music, and I think that's what sort of brought me into my musical taste today. I love rock music. I love one of my favorite artists right now is a musician named Adam Baldwin. He's a singer-songwriter out of the East Coast. He's from Nova Scotia, and he plays guitar in a band called Matt Mays and El Torpedo, which is a pretty straightforward rock band. But he has these sort of sad folk song records that are just some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life. And I have a feeling my 2023 Spotify Wrapped playlist is going to just show his music, a lot of that. But yeah, I love that. Maybe I'm getting to the age where I listen to a lot of music for nostalgia purposes. I find myself in a lot of 90s sort of pop rock zones a lot, and I'm like, I gotta get out of this and listen to something else. But I just love music, really. There's not a lot that I can't get behind, to be honest. For the folks listening, we should indicate that you are much younger than I am.
I don't know about that. I'm not going to make
so when
assumptions
we talk about nostalgia in the 90s.
Well, exactly. And this is what I mean. You know, for me, nostalgia would come from the 90s.
That's
for
right.
sure.
Yeah.
And so when I think of, you know, the music I grew up on, that's absolutely it.
Yeah.
And it's still, you know, I think like anybody, I laugh at my father-in-law for his 70s station that he listens to all the time. But you know, that again, that's I didn't grow up with a lot of music in my household.
Yeah.
So for me, I was finding my own, and a lot of the music that I did find was from the 60s and 70s. I fell in love with the Beatles and with Pink Floyd and you know, the Alan Parsons Project, and you know, things like it was. I fell in love with that music at a time when I was really developing my musical tastes, and I think that led into it.
For those people who are not familiar with how radio works, the announcer typically these days does not have much control over what songs are played. So the format of the first station that you worked at would be categorized as...
well, the first station I worked at was K-Rock 105.7. That would be a rock station. Nowadays, they would call it a mainstream rock station.
Okay, so it's rock. And the one you're working at now is hits from the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Yeah, it's more of a classic hits, classic rock based sort of station. I would say probably leans heaviest into the 70s, 80s, early 90s now. As time goes on, you start to realize that the 90s are now older music, that's right? So that's now part of those classic hit stations, as you're starting to hear that 90s music in there. But yeah, that's what I would consider Big FM now, classic rock station, maybe classic hits-ish sort of station.
Let's set music aside for a second and talk about the structure of a radio station, the fact that you are a morning man, so you're on bright and early in the morning.
Yep.
And again, for those folks who may not be familiar, that's the most important time block for a radio station.
Historically, historically, that's, you know, you have your drive times. You have your morning drive and your afternoon drive. Radio, you know, for many years has been built around when people are in their cars, because what's in everyone's car? A radio.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily even have radios in their homes anymore. I mean, and that's why we lean so heavily into the streaming of the stations too. But you know, your drive times, your morning and your afternoons is historically when people are in the car most. And so mornings has always been the pot of gold for a radio announcer, for a radio performer. It's you want to get up at stupid early and try and entertain people when they're on their way to work.
How stupid early for you?
I get up. My alarm goes off at 3:30, and that's early enough for me.
Okay. I never did mornings for a good reason, probably.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? Some people do it differently. I've worked with guys who would roll out of bed. The show would start at 6. They would roll out of bed, get in their car, get to the station, and rub their face, crack the mic, and start the show.
Yeah.
My show starts at 6. I like to be there about an hour before to get ready, but that 3:30 till say 5 o'clock is my time to sit, drink a coffee, read the news, whatever I got to do. Just wake up. I like to have started my day by the time my show has started. I spent so long doing an afternoon drive show that, you know, that was the end of my day, was the show. I would do all my other work before, and then the show was the end of the day. So when I transitioned to mornings a few years ago, it was really weird to just wake up and turn on the mic and start being Sideshow, if you will. Yeah. So I like to have that time before to sort of get my day started before I actually turn the microphone on for the first time.
So if you have a successful morning show, which means you have a lot of people listening to you in the morning, which means the sales department can sell more spots for a higher rate.
That's the goal,
That's what it's all about. So one of the things that has been characteristic of morning guys is that they throw in comedy bits. To keep people entertained, to get them off to work if that's where they're going, in the right kind of mood. So with respect to that, how much time do you spend coming up with the bits that you may incorporate into your show?
Well, I mean, bits are, I guess it depends on who you ask what a bit even is. You know, a comedy bit is usually something that's been put together, been written, been rehearsed, been scripted, been produced, or whatever. I incorporate a lot of comedy into my show, and that's just the way I am. That's what I'd like to listen to, whether it's a bit per se or just a fun conversation that has some comedy to it. I like to make sure that everything's kind of got a funny out, if you will, a funny way to get out of something. I rely heavily on my audience, on callers, and I like to use them to find the funny. If I have to start a conversation and then the callers can call up and continue that conversation, if I can find a funny way to use that or to get out of that, I think that to me is what's most interesting. The bits per se are work. They are work, and a lot of time and thought goes into those. You can tweak them for longer than you need to, but we're all our own harshest critics, I suppose. But I think comedy is a huge part of what I do. I think my show doesn't get too heavy and too serious too often. There's usually a lot of laughter. And I have to try and do that as one person in a room, which is different from a lot of morning shows who will have multiple people that can, provide laughter. So that's again why I always kind of consider the audience the co-host. I always say on the show, the show's better when you're a part of it, because they're my co-host, if you will.
If you were recording bits for your show in the morning and you were doing this years ago, you would have to get studio time to put together the bits. Yeah. Right now, I would assume that you can do a lot of this at home or on your own computer.
Yeah.
Given the technology.
Over the years, I've built up a decent little studio in a rough-in for a bathroom in my basement, but it sounds great, and at times I find it sounds better than a lot of professional studios I've heard.
That's why the kids call you Sideshow.
That's right.
There's no bathroom downstairs, Dad.
I don't even need a chair. But it's amazing what you can do with technology now. Yeah. I mean, I know this is an audio medium, but right now we're sitting in a room where you have a little recorder with two microphones plugged into it, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
You don't need big tape machines. You don't even need a computer here. Where I don't know, a few years ago, you probably would have had to have some sort of computer or laptop or something in order to record digitally. Now, gosh, you can do it on your phone. It's wild what you can do. Same thing with video editing, which is become a big part of what radio does now with social media. You can edit some pretty darn good videos on your iPhone with apps. It's wild.
We talked about the importance of a morning show to the station's survival in terms of financial cash flow. You know that you have competition around town. You know that people are listening to other kinds of morning shows, even if they're not listening on their radio, they may be listening on their computer and a station that's streaming. How does the competition aspect of this fit into the way you do your show, or do you just try to put it in the back burner?
Well, I mean, so I think in radio, it's as a performer of any kind, I think you have to have pretty thick skin, which unfortunately I don't think I do. But you have to kind of try and put it aside when you need to. But it is actually really funny that you asked this question right now, because right now I'm doing a promo that I came up with a while back. That we're calling it right now. We're calling it Sideshow's Big Bribe. Everything's got to have a name, of course, for a promo. But it came from a phone call I got a while back where someone had said, "Oh, I was trying to win something I could never get through, and you were calling these names of people, and they wouldn't call back, and I was so frustrated by that." And so I joked that, "Oh, I just got to pay people to listen to me." So I bugged the boss for some money, and he gave me some money to, as I'm saying, literally buy listeners. And so I lean into the fact that in the last ratings, I was number 2 in Kingston. And I'm telling people that everyone wants to say they're number 1 with dogs and cats aged 12 to 16. I'm saying in that core demo that everyone wants to win, which is adults 25, 54, I was number 2. I was not number 1. And I'm telling people, don't listen to the number 1 station. Come to me. I'll pay you to listen. You don't have to like me, but I'll pay you to listen. I had a caller and it started this time around. with a caller the other day who called up and said he was trying to call the number one morning show, believe it or not, who are two fantastic guys. I love them, Reed and Ben. And he was trying to call them to win some Kingston Frontenacs tickets, some hockey tickets. And I jokingly said, well, what do you want to talk to them for? I can talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. He said, well, they were giving away France tickets, 4-pack of France tickets. I said, I'll give you a 4-pack of France tickets, but you can never listen to them again. And so I can lean into the fact that, hey, I'm number 2, I'm not number 1. And I think the competition, if it's healthy, I think can be really good for business. I think it can be really good for what everyone's doing, as long as it's healthy.
Yep. Let's take that a step further and talk about radio more generally. Back in, I keep going back to my day in radio, which was in the 70s and 80s. We didn't have streaming. We didn't have MP3 players and all that sort of thing. So from your perspective as somebody who's been in radio for 15 years or so, where does radio sit these days in terms of the audience and trying to get an audience and trying to make it work?
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely still an audience for it, and the research. I don't know how the research works, but the research seems to say that all these big companies are paying even bigger companies to do research, and they're saying people are still listening to the radio, whether they're tuning in on their FM dial in their cars, or like I do, I ask my smart speaker at home, hey Google, play 96.3 Big FM, and boom, the station comes on. Yep. I think finding it's maintaining the audience is it was a big fear, I think, for radio, because again, we talked music earlier. A lot of people thought that people were going to the radio just for music, and I don't think that's how radio can survive, as just being a music medium. I mean, my phone in my pocket right here, I can find any song in the world that I could possibly want and play it for you right now. Yeah. On the radio, I got to tune in and hope that they're playing a song I like. Radio's got to win by connection. They've got to win by personality and that again, that direct connection with the listener. That I go back to saying I met someone and they already knew me for months or years, and I was meeting them for the first time. And that's where traditional radio is king. That's where it can win. There's a human connection there. There's a local connection to an extent. There's, again, if you're relying on playing the best music, people can find the best music anywhere. They've probably already bought it. Yeah. So again, you got to lean into the personality, lean into the connection. As someone who is outside the demographic that you're looking for in terms of ratings, from my perspective, one of the things that's missing in radio these days, and I think it's harder and harder for us to find, and that's local news coverage, is that if there's a story that you hear about, or somebody says there's a flood on Gardner's Road, and what's the story, and you tune in the radio station and you don't know if the announcer is there live or if they are pre-recorded, that sort of thing. What kind of feedback do you get from listeners on that score? I don't know so much about feedback. Again, I'm in a scenario where I'm, like I said, relying on my listeners a lot, and I rely on my listeners for, say, there's a flood on Gardner's Road, or the overpass, the train underpass is flooded and you can't get through unless you bring scuba gear, and I'm relying on people to call me with that. Or a lot of times, again, different world. People are texting now. Yep. I get a lot of text messages every morning from people, and that's traffic updates. That's, hey, can you tell the jerk on Montreal to wipe the snow off the back of his car? It's flying into my, that sort of thing. I have to rely on that. So it's not like there's a news department sitting there that can get me that information. And it's, as a lot of morning shows are, they're a 2-person operation, or in my case, a 1-person operation. There's not a lot of time to go digging. Yeah. So you really have to just get what you can from the listener, get it on the air, and hope that someone will correct you if it's wrong. That's right. Or that you can quickly find that information. Luckily, again, Twitter, the social media is pretty good for that stuff. It's not as immediate, though, unfortunately. Yeah.
A lot of radio stations these days are owned by big corporations. I think the last statistics I saw was that 2/3 of the stations in Canada are owned by big firms.
That would sound right.
There isn't, or there aren't that many independents anymore. Do you think that matters?
Yeah, I do. And I think it matters in a big way. I think it matters in a huge way. The last two companies I worked for were very big corporations, are very big corporations. The last one I worked for was one of the biggest in the country, if not the biggest in the country. And that corporation has a lot of money. They have a lot of sway, and they can throw a lot of money at things and make things happen. But they also have a lot of other focuses. That company had to focus a lot on selling cell service and cable and, everything. They had magazines for a while, all that stuff. They had to worry about selling tickets to the Blue Jays. So the radio wasn't their priority. It was, if there was money for it, they could do that, but there wasn't necessarily a priority for it. I think where the smaller companies come in is if that's their bread and butter and that's their livelihood, then that's what they're going to focus on. Yeah. And I think that's better. Again, competition, like I said, is best for business. It's best for the consumer at the end of the day as a listener. If you've got a radio station that is trying to be original, that's trying to serve the audience, then that's going to make everybody work a little harder. The corporations are, like I said, they're great. They put lots of money into the branding of things, but things get watered down. A lot of radio stations across the country all have the same name because they're all branded the same because they all belong to that company. Yeah. All those companies, Bell will have all their country stations are called Pure Country. All their pop stations are called Move. Rogers has all their rock stations are just called Rock, and they all have the same logo and they all have the same playlist. And again, that streamlines things, that helps them create a product that is easy to consume, but it's not necessarily the best focus, I think. So I think those small companies can definitely add to a market where it makes everyone kind of up their game. Yeah. And I think it's definitely better for the consumer, for the listener, if you will.
And I think if the small companies are going to succeed, they have to make money just like the big guys.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And the small companies are going to maybe work a little harder for your dollar, too.
Let's change gears again, talk about podcasting.
Yeah.
Which is what we're doing right now. You have done a couple of different podcasts that I've found anyway. One is called Rediscover Music that you did. I think that was between stations.
That was,
correct?
That was during my hiatus, if you will. my contractually obligated
Your
hiatus.
Sabbatical.
That was, again, technology being an amazing thing. Rediscover Music was kind of a passion project when I found out that there was a podcast hosting service that was owned by Spotify. Now, I know Spotify is the big, mean, evil corporation that doesn't pay its artists very well and all that sort of stuff that I've heard, but the service that I could provide on there was the closest thing to a radio show that any podcast provider could give me. And that was access to Spotify's music library and the ability to play it without having to get licensing, without having to go through any of that. It played through Spotify. The artists got paid, if you will, based on spins of my podcast, because those spins...
0.004 cents per
whatever
play,
the percentage
download,
is that Spotify pays. It's not very good, but it was a way that I could do something that was more similar to a radio show than a traditional podcast, because I had access to Spotify's library to do that. And it let me lean into one of my passions, and that was music, and actually get to play that music. Now, it was, a little different than, say, my radio show. Like I said, my morning show is a little more about fun, and I think I could take my morning show and put it on any radio station and it would sound the same. I could put it on a country station and it would sound the same, because I'm not necessarily talking about what those artists are up to or anything like that. It's all about fun and connection and entertainment. This was something I could lean into the music a little more, but then actually play the music. And I could bring the artists on. I could get those interviews. And I had a number of artists come on and just co-host a show with me, and I let them pick the music.
Yeah.
So it was like having free reign of a radio station. That is probably not a good idea, but that's kind of what it was, and I love doing it. But it, again, when I started working in radio again, it was just another show to add on top of the 7 that I'm doing a week. So,
sidebar question here with respect to music. You sit down and talk to a lot of different musicians, some local, some not local.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, how do musicians and bands make their money these days? Is it by touring, doing gigs, or is it by selling their product? Because I don't get the sense they sell a lot of vinyl.
No,
CDs.
Vinyl's kind of making its way back.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. But again, if it's music, whoever their label is has got their hands on that pretty heavily. I think bands are making money touring, for sure, and merchandising, and aside from the music.
That's what someone told me. Merchandising's a big thing.
Yeah. So band merch is helping bands in a big way, especially if you're going to the show, you're buying a ticket that's supporting the band, and then you're buying it at the merch table. Well, that cash you're handing the band stays with the band. It doesn't go to someone else.
So when we're talking merchandise, we're talking sweatshirts and T-shirts and
T-shirts,
hats and
all that, posters, all that sort. Whatever you see at a merch table when you go to see a concert, that stuff is owned by the band, and they're making the money off of that. I think touring is still a very big thing for bands. Honestly, releasing music, they're probably not making money off the music, but they need music for people to come to the concerts.
That's right.
So it's weird to say that writing and recording music is a necessary evil for bands, because you'd think that would be the main draw. But really, the money isn't in the recording and writing of music, unless you get some huge hit.
Yeah.
And it's probably not even you that's singing it. You're getting the royalties from that. But a lot of the money is coming from the touring and the merchandising.
So when you decided that you didn't have time to do a music show as a podcast when you got back into doing real radio, you decided to do a podcast on wrestling.
Yeah, that started during my time off too. I was
wrestling.
I was a wrestling fan growing up as a kid, and a number of years ago now, the WWE came out with the WWE Network. And I was fascinated by this. I hadn't watched wrestling in a very long time, and I thought, well, this is neat. I can pay $10 a month, and I get all their pay-per-views and stuff. And not that I'd even know anyone who's on the TV now, but I can watch every single thing that has ever aired from 1970 whatever to today. And so I started paying for this subscription and just watching all the old shows that I used to watch, all the old wrestling shows, the old pay-per-views. And I got kind of inspired. During my time off, I was thinking a lot about podcasting and what I was going to do, and to sort of fulfill that creative side of me. And I thought, well, geez, wouldn't it be fun to break down some of these old shows that I know there is a big wrestling market out there that is still watching these old shows or would remember these shows. And so the idea behind that show was to I call them awards, hand out awards after watching each show. We would watch a pay-per-view from 1983, and then we'd say, okay, who had the best match? Who had this? Who oversold the most? Who had the worst promo? Who had, and we sort of break it down that way. And it's proved to be, more fun than anything. I haven't made a dime off these podcasts, but gosh, they're fun to do. Just to go back, and it gives me an excuse to go back and watch these things, but then experience them with a couple of friends or guests on the show who have also watched it, and we can talk about it. Whereas, I don't remember the last time I sat down and watched a wrestling pay-per-view with a group of friends. Yeah. I was probably 12, but now to watch it and then sit and talk about it with some friends who are passionate about it is a ton of fun. So I think that sort of translates into the product.
Yeah. As someone who makes his living working in radio, I'm sort of curious about something. I've spoken to a couple of people, long-haul truckers who are on the road hours at a time. And one of them said to me that he just downloads a bunch of podcasts and listens to them as he's driving. Years ago, it would have been finding a radio station as they drove from town to town that they could pipe
Scanning.
into.
Yeah.
Where does podcasting and radio fit in? Are they complementary, or is one going to take over?
I don't know that one can possibly take over when I honestly think they both provide different services. They're both audio, sure. They're both conversation, sure. But I think podcasting is, and I'm a binge podcast listener. I find a podcast I like and I go back to episode 1 and I just plow through it until it's done, and then I get depressed and I have to find something new because now I got to wait a week for every new episode. I think podcasting provides a very, very specific product. The thing I love about podcasting is that I can find exactly, hey, I want to listen to an old wrestling guy talk about a pay-per-view from 1982, and I want to hear what he has to say about that time. The guy, I can find that pretty easily. It's very niche, very specific, and I think, podcasters have done a great job in realizing that maybe when they create a podcast, going niche is the way to go. You have to find an audience. You can't try and make a podcast that's for everybody, because that's not how I think podcast listeners listen to podcasts. At least that's not how I listen to them. I think as far as radio goes, radio is, it does its best to try and please everybody, or please everybody within a certain demographic or a certain genre, if you will, a certain format. But it needs to lean into a personal connection with the audience that podcasting is getting a lot better at doing, but I don't know that it can offer the same as radio can't provide what podcasting is offering.
One of the things I was sort of concerned about when I was doing these podcasts is that I didn't know if anyone was listening. Right. And so you have to tee up with somebody who can give you some numbers that you can look at and figure if it's worth continuing to do. But you sit down and you figure, well, if you're doing a podcast that's 30 to 40 minutes, then you're asking for a commitment from someone to sit down and listen for 30 or 40 minutes, as opposed to jumping into a radio station for 15 or 20 as they're on their way to work.
Right. Devil's advocate here, I would say that I enjoy the long form in that I can stop it when I get to work and pick it back up again when I get back in the car. It's like, it's almost something I look forward to at the end of the day. If I'm listening to a podcast on my way into work in the morning, because again, I work in radio, so sometimes I just need to shut the radio off. If I've got a podcast on that I'm really enjoying, I get to work, I turn it off. At the end of the day, I'm wrapping up, I'm finishing up things, and I go, going to go pick up where I left off on that podcast, and I can consume it all. Whereas with radio, people are jumping in and out and never getting the rest of that. Yeah. With podcasting, you get the rest of it. Mm-hmm. It's in radio, there's a thing called TSL, time spent listening, where you try and keep people listening for longer. You hook them with things to say, like, coming up after the commercial break, and you give them a little tease that'll make them stick around. And in podcasting, people literally are sticking around for that, whether they're stopping or not. They're going to come back to it, probably. They're going to come back to it the next time they're in their car, or the next time they're mowing the lawn, or whatever it is they do while they're listening to podcasts. They're coming back to where they left off with you. And I think that's really cool in that they always get the full story. Where in radio, once you turn that radio off, if you're in the middle of something, you're not catching the end of it. Yeah.
And just for you, the listener who may be tuning into this and wondering about some numbers, I'll give you a couple. From some research that I found back in 2021, which is the last set of numbers I have, there were 2.5 million podcast listeners in Canada, 15,000 distinct podcasts. And I would assume a year and a half later that number has gone even higher.
Well, I think the beautiful thing about podcasting is also one of the worst things about podcasting is anyone can do it.
There's too much product out there.
It's so watered down.
So like watching TV shows on a streaming service.
Yeah, exactly. There's just too much. What do I want to watch this for? So there is so much out there.
Yep.
You talk about how 2 point whatever million people listening sounds like a huge number, but when you think of the amount of podcasts that are available to them, it's hard to cut through.
Yep.
And with the ease of creating a podcast now, with the ease of putting one together, I mean, you can record a podcast with a couple of microphones that cost you $30 each and a recorder that costs you $100, but
I spent more than $30.
No, I'm not saying you. Listen, I'm looking at your Audio Technica microphones here. These are some quality mics. I got the USB and the XLR. Listen, I'm a gear guy, and you got a great recorder over there. But if you've got a phone, you can make a podcast.
That's right.
And the problem is a lot of people do just that. They have a phone, so they make a podcast, and it does water down the market, if you will, or the product. But I think that the people who are doing it right are the ones that are going to stand out. But again, it does take away from that bigger picture, for sure.
Yeah. Let's get back to you. And you're born and bred Kingstonian. Well, not necessarily Kingstonian, but you grew up just outside of town.
I always say Kingston when people ask. Yeah.
Community involvement for somebody in your position. How important is that to you?
It's a big part of what I do. I mean, it's not as much as it used to be. I think everyone could probably say the same, just from getting back to normal as much as we can since 2020, right? It's been a few years now of things still not being sure what they are and how they operate. A lot of things have changed and a lot of things are working differently and operating differently. But I think community involvement is a big part of everything we do as broadcasters. On the vanity side of things, you want to be seen, you want people to see you doing things. So there's that part of it. But there's also, there is a feeling of wanting to give back to the community because, again, you're providing this product that doesn't exist if it's not for the community. So I'd say it's a huge part of what we do, whether it's emceeing a local walk for ALS or it's going to one of the charities and collecting boxes of cereal for the food sharing project or anything like that. I think it's a huge part of what we do.
And you also have to integrate family life too. And sometimes people forget that, the guy behind the microphone, a lot of the times has a family. And if he gets up at 3:30 in the morning, kids are going to be saying, as Sideshow, are you coming to my beaver meeting this week?
Yeah. I have two daughters, Stevie and Stella, who are 3 and 7. And so they occupy every other moment of my life, which I have learned to make more and more. I think if you'd asked me that question before I had my kids, and even before I was married, I would probably tell you, nope, I focus every moment of my life on this. On this microphone in front of me right now is my whole life. And it's still a big part of what I do, but I've learned very, very much so that finding more time for them and being a part of what they are and who they are and what they do is even more important to me now. But I like to incorporate them in what I do. And I think that's also, whether it's having them on the air for a bit of some kind, or when I do events, when I host events, a lot of times they come to the event and they partake and they enjoy. They take part in the ALS walk, or they get to go enjoy the buskers while I'm emceeing the Buskers Rendezvous or something like that, or they get to go and see the movie that I'm introducing at the theater. So they get to kind of be a part of it, and that's kind of the best way I can incorporate them into what I do, because I want to be a part of their lives as much as I possibly can.
10 years from now, where is Sideshow?
It's a really good question. I wish I had the answer to that. I'll be honest with you. What year is it? 2023, 2 years ago, I would have told you I'd still be at K-Rock 105.7 hosting afternoons or mornings or whatever I was doing. I honestly thought that was the rest of my life. I spent 15 years there. It was my favorite radio station as a teenager. And it was a dream come true when I got that job. People would always say to me, like, wow, like you're doing exactly what you wanted. Most people get to say, yeah, you're doing what you wanted. You're in radio. I was doing literally exactly what I wanted. Yeah. And up until I was let go a couple of years ago, I would have told you that. I would have told you this is where I am for life. So now, I've become quite attached to the people I work with at Chorus Kingston and at Global TV and at Big FM, and I have become attached to that. But I also don't know what the future holds for this industry. I don't know what I read a story the other day that there are major companies that are testing AI DJs for their radio stations that are artificial intelligence DJs that just need to be programmed with some thoughts and they'll speak them, and I don't think we're very close to that taking over our jobs necessarily, but who knows what this business has to offer. You said earlier about how there's probably 3 big companies that own a lot of the stations in this country. Well, when those companies are done with people or with you, what else is there? And I love it here. I want to be here. And if there's no radio for me here, there's always something else, I'm sure. And if it means I'm making podcasts or making videos with my kids, then that's what I'm doing.
Hometown's a big thing for you.
I love it here. Yeah. I mean, I've never been one to wave the flag. Like I love this city. But I love it here because it's my home. Yeah. My family is here. My friends are here. And that has never changed for me. I have never done the radio thing, and that's travel to work. I have always been here. I grew up here. I grew up in Wilton. My mom has owned the Wilton General Store since I was 1 year old, and she has worked that store by herself every day for 36 years, and she still does it. And, I went to school here. I started my career here, and I hope that I end my career here. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's a long time from now. Yeah. But you never know. But you never know. So to say 10 years, I hope I'm still hosting the morning show on Big FM, because I love doing what I do. And I hope that it's in that capacity that I'm still doing it. There are other avenues in this business that you can get into. There are sales, there are production and writing and stuff like that. There is the TV end of things, but I love what I do every morning. And I hope that in 10 years, someone's asking me, you think you're still going to be hosting the morning show on Big FM in 10 years? Because that's what I like to do. I feel like that's all I know how to do. I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't doing this.
Well, if you're like a lot of former broadcasters from Kingston, financial services is something that a lot of them have done, including yours truly.
I know a lot of former radio guys now seem to be getting into real estate. So maybe that's a lot of the guys I've talked to getting into real estate. So maybe that's next, right?
Sell your house with Sideshow.
Yeah, exactly. I got to come up with a real clever slogan and stuff. Smack my ugly mug on some signs out front of people's houses. See if I can get them sold. But I mean, there's always that what if, right?
Yeah.
I think anybody in any industry probably feels that, especially if you've been in it long enough.
Well, listen, Sideshow, I really appreciated your time today. Enjoyed the conversation. All the best to you, and hopefully you don't get tired of getting up at 3:30 in the morning.
Thanks, Dave.
My guest in this episode, Ryan Lemmon, known to his radio listeners as Sideshow, the host of the morning show on CFMK Radio. And that station is available online at 963bigfm.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.